Welcome to Morae's podcast series, Speaking of Changing Legal, where we discuss the leading trends and innovations that are reshaping the way legal work is done. Today's episode features Morae's Aisha Tan speaking with Phyllis Turner-Brim, a Deputy General Counsel at HP, who talks about her career and experiences as an African-American woman in the legal field.
Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us today, Phyllis. Welcome to the Morae podcast. We are so excited to feature an incredible female leader like yourself in the industry. I know you're serving today as the Deputy General Counsel at HP, and I just wanted to say we are so grateful for the time that you've given us today to discuss your career, journey, experiences, and insight on the industry today. So just thank you again, and we're so excited to have you.
Well, I am so pleased to be here with you and to have this, opportunity. It's always been one of my dreams to be on a podcast. So this is my second opportunity to do a podcast, and I'm just really excited to have this conversation.
Amazing. And I'm so excited to learn more from you, and I know our listeners are too. So I guess just as a starting point, I would love to take a step back and just kind of hear about truly what inspired you to be a lawyer in the first place and kind of set the stage on how you got started on your career.
I guess I'm a lawyer because I was going to be a doctor. And when I was growing up in the 60s and 70s and in the Chicago area, if you were a smart person, particularly if you were a smart Black person, you were going to be a doctor because that's most of the incredibly talented people that you knew were doctors or lawyers or teachers. And so as I was graduating from high school and was going off to college, I got some very good advice from a person who remained a mentor of mine until his unfortunate death a couple of years ago. And he just advised me, there aren't really any jobs for people who major in pre-med. So why don't you major in chemical engineering and then take all of the biology and other things that you need to take the MCAT, because that's really your, goal in undergraduate school. You can take those as electives, and off to medical school you can go. But suppose, if you decide that you can't go or don't want to go, you will have the opportunity to have a very productive and lucrative career as a chemical engineer. So I majored in chemical engineering, decided that being a doctor was not for me, that was a calling, and I didn't have that calling on my life. Went to work and worked for General Electric and then Procter & Gamble. And while at Procter & Gamble, had the opportunity to work with the patent lawyers there, and decided that was something that I wanted to do. I love technology. I enjoy learning new things and exploring innovation. But, honestly, I wasn't that crazy about doing it. And I certainly couldn't make shampoo for the next 30 years. So I decided to go to law school to be a patent lawyer, and never would have thought that would have been the direction my career would have taken if you had told me when I graduated from undergraduate school with a bachelor's degree in chemical engineering that I was going to go to law school, 4 or 5 years later, I wouldn't have believed you. And so I guess that, to me, that's the first one of my, what I call them, one of my rules to live by, and that is to be open to the journey. So that's why I'm a lawyer. I went to law school to be a patent lawyer and to participate in the innovation economy.
Incredible. That's amazing. And I don't blame you for not wanting to make shampoo for the remainder of your career. But it sounds like you've always been sort of interested in innovation and kind of technology. And, luckily that translated to your legal career. Were there any pivotal moments or specific influential factors kind of as you were in your early career transitioning to legal that really solidified your decision to enter the legal industry?
I would say the first of all, just having exposure to patent law. I didn't know patent law was a thing until I worked with patent lawyers. I didn't know that was a profession. And now, I actively work to expose undergraduate STEM educated students to patent law as a profession so they will have information that I didn't have. So definitely a pivot, just having the experience to work as a product developer with the patent attorneys. I would also say, along with that is the importance of protecting inventions and innovation to business. Many a business, including Procter and Gamble and many other companies, General Electric, HP, Starbucks, lots of places I've been and many places I haven't been, are really built on innovation. And so having that invention and innovation economy is really important because it supports the growth of the business. I will say one of the things that didn't shock me or surprise me, and something that I probably, could have ferreted out if I thought about it for more than a couple of minutes at the time, is that how there are so few, in particular African American, and in particular African American females and women in this profession. It is, I am the rarest of birds in the legal profession. And unfortunately, the needle hasn't moved that much in the past 30 years since I've been practicing law.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you make a great point, right? Well, while we have made some progress, there's still a long way to go as women, and especially minority women. The hope is that we can have leaders like you pave the way for us to continue that growth and all lean on each other to accelerate that growth. And I think that's so important. And I know we're going to dive more into that a little bit later. But, you mentioned you've been at some wonderful companies in your career. I think some that are obviously very notable that you just mentioned, such as Starbucks. You're currently at HP. I see Walmart and some others. Just over the trajectory of your career, generally speaking, how do you feel that the role of in-house counsel has evolved, and even particularly IP counsel? I'd love to understand kind of from when you started to where you are today, how do you feel the role of in-house counsel has evolved generally?
I think the starkest example can be seen by really zeroing in on, in particular, intellectual property, and I will say within that, the patent law. When I became a patent lawyer 30 years ago, for the most part, patent law and the patent lawyers was this backwater practice that nobody ever knew was going on. It was something that really went on in the background, and only insiders were aware of the significance of patents and were involved in the process of obtaining and also enforcing them. But fast forward, probably 10 years into my practice, there just became some very notable cases, and in particular the Rim case from ancient history, which related to blackberries, which is when patents and patent law began to show up on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. What began to happen is patents were more utilized as a significant, not only technical, but business asset. And these issues were playing out in the business arena and in the everyday lives of people. There also was a lot of money involved. So what happened was, the chief IP counsel and patent lawyers in an organization now had a connection directly to revenue and began to have conversations with the CFO about not only exposure, but also monetization. And I think that was a big shift in the patent profession in particular. That now we don't just talk about obtaining patents and patent prosecution, and all those things are really important. We also talk about monetization and how assets can be used to support a business, not just because it's protecting innovation, but also can bring in revenue. That is a huge shift in the patent arena. And I think in smaller ways, that's a very similar shift that has happened in other disciplines in the in-house practice, is that we've become much more focused on growing and supporting and facilitating the business versus always focusing on managing risk, which can be two different things.
Yeah, definitely. I think even just throughout my conversation with legal leaders like yourself, it's such an important trend to highlight, right? That the in-house teams are strategic business partners and can actually accelerate revenue, and doesn't always have to be what the Department of No is what we hear everywhere, or just managing risk, right? And specifically in the patent area, I find it so interesting because there is so much innovation happening today. You see these huge patent teams in-house. And so I'd love to understand, I guess, what is the significance of bringing your patent counsel in-house versus sending it to outside counsel?
Well, I think it depends on the size of your portfolio, the size of your budget, what your objectives are, the technologies on which you're operating and dealing with daily. It really comes down to I don't necessarily think it just boils all down to dollars and cents, but that has a lot to do with it. I mean, we evaluate every role that I have been in where I have been managing the IP function. And I've been in businesses where patent prosecution, trademark prosecution have been done in-house, as well as when those things have been placed with outside counsel. And it really does come down to where you see the strategic opportunities to lie and what works better or best for an organization, both from a monetary perspective and efficiency perspective, and also from a strategic perspective. And each organization needs to evaluate what the appropriate structure is for their organization. I don't believe one size fits all. I mean, at one point, it was all in vogue to send things to outside counsel. Then it became in vogue to bring them back inside, and then became in vogue to send them back outside counsel. But at the end of the day, I think each organization evaluates what is the structure that they would like to have, and how is it they would like for the in-house resources to be spending their time.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing. Super insightful. And as a leader who's experienced kind of all structures or many different types of structures, I think it's great to hear your perspective on that. I'd like to pivot a little bit and kind of just as we're here reflecting on your journey and your career, I'd love to understand from where you are today, were there any female leaders or mentors throughout your career who had positively impacted you, and how?
Well, fortunately, I have had a series of women who have role modeled, mentored, sponsored, and impacted my career journey in a positive sense, really from the very beginning, because the very first one was my mother. My mother, who is my ultimate role model, came up in an era where a lot of women didn't work outside the home, but my mother did. And so she was the first sort of career woman that I experienced. And unfortunately, she did it so well that it was a high bar for me and my sisters when we became professionals as well. Every day I'm reminded of how I am definitely not my mother. And I have not lived up to that, to her role model. And not just, as to how she lived her life, as a mother and a professional and a woman who managed a significant team in the public sector, but also, really as a leader and manager. One of the many things I used to do for my mother when I was coming up is type her. This is ancient history because I'm saying type on a typewriter her performance reviews for her team. And as I became a professional, there was many a time when I was having a leadership challenge when I would talk it over with my mother. And she would say something like, "Oh, that's just like the time, I had to deal with Mrs. Owens." And then she'll go down the story of, what that was and how that was. So first and foremost, my mother. And then I've had just the good fortune, to work in at least 5 instances with female general counsels, and in one instance, Black female general counsel. So again, these were women who did a couple of things. One, challenged me to grow my practice and grow my capability and become fearless as a lawyer. I had one general counsel who felt, and rightly so, that there probably wasn't much of anything in the legal department I couldn't do. And so she consistently was saying, oh, that immigration thing, Phyllis, I want you to handle that. Or that real estate thing, I want you to handle that. Or, we have this commercial agreement over here. Why don't you work on that as well, along with all the stuff I was doing in the patent front? And that really just grew me and made me fearless as a lawyer, and brought that fearlessness that I learned from my mother as an individual to my practice as a lawyer. And then just a series of 3 or 4 other female general counsel and one Black female general counsel who in particular just saw things in me that even perhaps I didn't see in myself, and have been not only my leaders, but my sponsors, my mentors, and my role model. And I think that's probably a little unique.
Yeah.
It's probably a unique experience that many other, women who sit at the level in organizations that I sit at, and particularly in my practice, but I was very fortunate in that regard.
Yeah, that's truly incredible. And I mean, so much of what you said resonates. I think, my mother was also the first corporate woman in my life, and definitely a lot of stories from there. But I often go back to her for career advice, because she was definitely my first exposure to anything in corporate America. And then just having a series of women leaders to sponsor you is so incredible. And having experienced that, I'm sure there are so many people out there who are just itching for that experience. And, I hope they get it. So just, throughout those leaders that have sponsored you, mentored you, taught you fearlessness, especially in this industry, I guess I would love to take it one step further and just really understand, how have some of these relationships enriched your perspective on leadership, and what are some of the lessons, like key lessons from these mentors, have you personally integrated into your own style?
Well, one thing is they each came to the GCC a different way. And I think that's so important to have a number of different examples of the journey to GC, if that's your aspiration, or to Deputy GC, if that's your aspiration. Because so frequently we get caught up in, oh, you had to go to this law school, and you had to go to this undergraduate school, and you had to be on this or that law review, and you had to have been at this or that law firm, and all those other things. Well, I have a solid, and what I consider to be a fabulous undergraduate education and a fabulous law school education. But I didn't go to any place fancy. I just went to great places. And what I always like to share, and what many of these women shared with me, was you don't have to have the quote unquote pedigree to add value and to rise in the ranks in an organization. So having those examples of there are different ways to progress and be and live in a corporate environment and succeed. Also, many of them, all of them were tough on me. They had very high expectations, and I didn't get a pass on anything. I mean, there were lots of times when I had to redo things, rework things, made mistakes. They all were tolerant of that, provided I didn't make the same mistake over and over again, right? You have to learn. You have to learn. And being willing to let me take on and do as much as I thought, and then beyond what I thought I could take on and do, because I performed well in what I had, right? So if you're a good steward and you're a good performer over a small thing, then you get bigger and bigger and bigger things. You get bigger and bigger deals. You get bigger and bigger and bigger portfolios. You get more and more and more responsibility as you prove yourself along the way. And one of the attributes of these, incredible women that I work for is they weren't stingy with those opportunities. They laid them out and expected me to lean in and be successful. And they supported my success.
I love that. Absolutely love that. I think that, mentoring can be such an important, and sponsorship can be such an important part of anyone's career, but in particular, it's so important for women to lift up other women and pave that way and provide each other with opportunities. I think it's such an important part of just being a woman in especially a male-dominated industry. And you mentioned a little bit earlier about how you support, younger professionals in STEM, but would love to understand how you approach mentoring and supporting other women in the legal profession.
Well, I will get to that in 1 second because I want to make sure that I do make something clear. I had a lot of men in my career. I've had male GCs who were equally as supportive, who saw talent in me and fostered that talent and grew that talent and supported my growth in very incredible ways, including way back to my first job out of law school when I was at a law firm. One particular partner at that law firm really invested in me and saw that. I remember him saying to me at some point, Phyllis, I always knew you would be, chief IP counsel at a Fortune 100 company one day. And I wouldn't have said that that's anything that I knew about myself at that time, or even thought about myself at that time. So can't leave those men out. But I've had a lot of great women. I think it's incumbent upon women who are seniors in organizations and who have been able to achieve that next step or some level of success to mentor, support, and coach mid-career and new to the career women. As I mentioned before, particularly in the patent arena, there still remains a dearth, many fewer women, certainly fewer women of color in the highest ranks. And that is my goal, to help women rise through the ranks to the most senior levels, right? Because there is data to support, and I think I'm not making this up completely, that the number of men and women coming out of law school going into profession is at least equal and may even be more women than men. But when we talk about partners in law firms, deputy general counsels, general counsels, managing attorneys, we still see fewer women in those. My goal is to help others and support other women, and particularly women of color, who want to achieve, to the extent that I've been successful, who want to achieve my level of success or beyond, to support them in doing it. And so I do a lot of coaching, do a lot of mentoring, I do a lot of sponsoring, I do all of it, right? I match people or present people with opportunities. I grow people in my own arena. And I also, spend my time and my philanthropy in closing the racial gap and the gender gap in the technology space.
That's incredible. And thank you so much for sharing that. Like I said, and I think that we can all agree that mentorship plays such a critical role. And I think just having somebody to look up to, and like you mentioned earlier, right, somebody who sees the things that you don't even see in yourself is just can be so impactful. And having leaders like yourself mentor others in the profession is truly an incredible thing. I mean, within that same vein, I guess, in your experience as you're mentoring specifically women, I guess what are some qualities that are most important to succeed in the legal industry, and how can those qualities be strengthened? I'd also be interested to hear how maybe some coaching you've provided around these areas as well.
Well, first of all, it's the same for men as it is for women in this regard. This is a relationship-based profession. So in order to succeed, whether you're in-house counsel or working in a law firm, what you've got to be great at is building relationships, and frequently building relationships with people who are very different than yourself, that they come from different places, that they may be a different gender, that they may be a different race, they may be a different ethnicity, they may speak other languages. But that is the marketplace out there now. In order to be successful, you've got to be able to build relationships with all kinds of people, and also people who are placed up and down an organization. We often hear about, managing up, but managing up, that's just one piece of it. You've also got to manage across, and you have to manage down, right? Everybody in an organization has a role to play. You have something in common. I have something in common with everybody that I meet, everybody that I work with. And it's my job to figure out what it is and to build a relationship with that person based upon our commonalities, so that we will have that platform and we will have that tie when I have to deliver the bad news. Because at some point as a lawyer, you're delivering bad news.
Yeah.
And you need to have that relationship with your clients, with your peers, with your direct reports, with your leaders, in order to be able to do that effectively. So it's about relationships. Relationships traditionally have been harder in some arenas for women to build, and particularly women of color to build, than others, than white men, for example. And that is because of, the old boys network and the golf club or the golf course and the various other places where business is done. That's changing somewhat, but the informal networks and focusing on the informal networks and the weak ties is something that I always encourage people to do, because your best opportunities frequently don't come from people that you know well, because the people that are in your inner circle, well, you all usually have exposure to all the same opportunities. There's been some research done that is actually from your weak ties. So these are people who are not in your inner circle, but are tangential to, or that you have one or two interactions with, that is where your greatest opportunities come from. And if your opportunities come from that space, then what that's telling you is you don't know where your opportunity is going to come from. So you should always be focused on building a positive relationship. And you should consider each interaction with any individual to be an opportunity to enhance or diminish your brand. And if you think about it like that, you will be more mindful of how you speak, what you say, and how you interact.
That's really great advice. And I'm taking notes right here as we speak. I think that's really important in any industry, is just relationship building. But as you think about taking that advice one step further, I guess, what would you say to somebody that's looking to expand their network or build relationships? Maybe what are some steps that you've taken in the past that have been successful, or that you would advise somebody entering the industry or somebody early on in their career?
I would say lean into what you have a passion around. I had a friend of mine that always says you should enter from where you are, and I always take that to mean don't try to do some extraordinary networking extravaganza activities. It is, if you have a common interest, you're a dog lover. Well, there's places where dog lovers are, right? Are a vinophile like I am, I love wines. Then that's a space you can begin to explore, because you can't spend all your time looking at networking as a chore and interacting with it as a chore or a job, because then you'll be miserable. You will be miserable and it won't come naturally. Some people say, well, networking doesn't come naturally. I think it does come naturally depending on who you are, where you are, and what you're doing. But if you're trying to do something that is really not you, and you're in this space that is really where you don't feel comfortable, meaning you don't feel that you can build relationships in that place, then you probably aren't going to be successful. And recognize that building relationship is a process. Like, I have outside counsel that I have retained and do business with, some of whom I've known for more than a decade, and we never did business. We were just investing in a relationship. But then when there came a time for me to need outside counsel for something, they were on the top of my mind because they had been focused on building a relationship with me. I recently heard some great advice, that I think I had always intuitively adopted, but when I heard it spoken most recently, I said, that's really the key. Focus on what you can do for somebody else. What is it? How can I meet an unmet need?
Mhm.
That may mean that, I have colleagues in every organization I've been in who have children who are aspiring to go to law school. And they'll say, and I'll know that, and I'll say, well, bring Sally in and she can sit with me for the day, or she can sit with, people who are on my team. I mean, sitting with me for the day is going to be pretty boring because I spend a lot of my time just talking about the budget and lots of other things at this point. But, shadowing folks on my team, or making a connection. If it's not, a person wants to be a lawyer, but maybe connecting them to, oh, you should talk to so and so because they're pursuing that. When I hear what people are interested in, I frequently try to connect them to folks who have a similar interest or who can meet that need. And if you go through life, I mean, that's how I go through life. It's how can I help you?
I really love that. And I love your perspective on networking because I think it just really humanizes it a lot. I know a lot of people have come to me just throughout my career saying that they dislike networking or what have you, but really just thinking about networking in a perspective is just what are you interested in? Dogs, wine, that something as simple as that can be networking. And I think that's really powerful. So thank you so much for sharing that. I guess I just want to take a little bit of a pivot here. And, as we think about wrapping, want to just revisit kind of some trends in women in the legal industry today. Can you discuss just any innovations or trends that you might be seeing that are empowering women in the field today? Broadly speaking, just some things you've noticed that you're keen to keep track of.
Well, the number one thing is flexible work, right? I think the gift of our terrible, awful years of being a pandemic is that we've learned to work in places that we didn't and we didn't before, and we learned to work in ways that we hadn't before. And I think that has been powered. I believe there may be research. I read a lot of things, so I may have read this, or I could just be making it up. But those flexible work arrangements, I feel, have empowered and will continue to empower women. And it will also make the process of being engaged in this profession more fun.
Yeah.
When you have the flexibility to do a lot of things and to make a lot of your life work, really, no matter who you are, you're going to have more fun and you're going to be more engaged when you are engaged in work, right? And so that is a piece I think we need to continue to figure out. First of all, hybrid work, as they're calling it. I don't like to call it hybrid work because hybrid sort of implies there are two modes, work or office, but that's
Yes.
not home or office, but that's not really what's happening. What's happening now is it's the work anywhere, I think, philosophy, the ability to have an impact and to build value in an organization from any place at any time. That,
Yeah.
I feel, is a trend that is particularly helpful to women.
Yeah, definitely. I was going to say that resonates a lot. I think the pandemic was obviously, there was a lot that came with that, but that was one of the beautiful things that came out of it is the work from anywhere. And I know personally it was really helpful for me with a small child, and I'm sure helpful for a lot of other people out there too. And I hope it continues to accelerate and people continue, and leaders especially, continue to see the benefits. And I guess as we're wrapping up, we're just here at about time. One final question for you is, what message do you hope to send listeners, especially women in the profession?
That there's a place for you. Whatever your aspirations are in this profession or generally, and whatever you would like to achieve, those things are possible. Now, I'll say in the same sentence that they're not going to be easy, but you can and will be successful. And I'll leave with one of the sayings that both my parents used a lot when I was coming up, and that is, the only place you'll see success come before work is in the dictionary.
I love that. Thank you so much for your time today. This was super insightful for me, and I know it will be for our listeners as well. But, thank you for taking the time out of your day. We're so happy to have you and feature you on our podcast. And I hope we can do this again.
Well, thank you so much for having me.